I'm having a little bit of fun today. I am wearing my triathlon medal. I competed in a triathlon yesterday before recording this, and I've just been wearing my triathlon award all day today. So I'm pretty proud of that. It was my very first one. I did an Olympic triathlon. If you are an Olympic triathlete or a triathlete, or you do 5Ks or 10Ks or half marathons, let me know in the comments. I'd love to connect. Today's interview is with Becky Mollenkamp, and she's the author of a book that's now out called Liberate Your Business. The big idea that we really explore in this conversation is how to build a more equitable and diverse and inclusive business within the already flawed capitalistic system. How do we build a business that doesn't just try to extract as much from its staff and employees and human effort to a business that can allow for a more collaborative flourishing? She is a bisexual, intersectional feminist. In other words, she believes that nobody's free until all of us are free. We also talk about how oppressive a capitalistic system impacts LGBTQ plus individuals, as well as other minorities like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so I'm really interested in hearing your perspective in the comments below. I'm Shawn Quintero, and this is Proud to Lead. I think one of the big ideas that you bring to the table is extractive business versus liberatory business. And the idea that extractive business, or like empire building, prioritizes growth at the expense of workers, clients, community, and self, versus liberatory businesses, which reorients around collective flourishing. How are you seeing this kind of hierarchical empire building extractive business model negatively impacting LGBTQ plus folks in society?
I mean, where is it not? I suppose you could, look at. I mean, first of all, I am an intersectional feminist, which means I don't think any of us are free until all of us are free. I think our overlapping identities matter. And I am in a white body. Certainly, I have a lot of privilege there. I'm also queer. So there's marginalization there. I'm a woman. There's marginalization there. So when we talk about queer folks as a whole, that includes Black and brown queer folks. It includes Black women who are queer. And who has been the most affected in this last year, just economically, if we're talking just about money? When we look at those 30,000 people laid off from Oracle, I can almost guarantee you, without having to even look at the numbers, that that 30,000 is overrepresented by marginalized folks. And that would include many queer folks, right? And Black folks who might not be queer, but they are also, until all of us are free, none of us are free. So all of these decisions affect everyone, but they tend to affect those who hold the most marginalized identities the most, first and the most, right? So all
Mm,
these decisions, it's not made in a vacuum. All of these decisions affect all of us, but they're affecting some of us more. And it is typically those who have the most marginalized identities, which often means LGBTQ folks, but most especially it usually means Black and brown LGBTQ folks, immigrant LGBTQ folks, right? So I think it's also important for us to remember that, because I think sometimes it's easy for someone like me who's, yes, LGBTQ, but I'm also white. I have a lot of privilege because of that. And so it sometimes can look easy to say, like, well, it's not affecting all the LGBT folks I know, but maybe that's because they're also all white and have a lot of privilege. So I don't know. I just think it's important to remember that it's affecting until none of us are affected by these hierarchical systems, then we all are. And
mm,
these systems are designed specifically to keep those with the most marginalized identities at the bottom of that pyramid. I mean, that is what hierarchy is about. Matriarchy, as some people would define matriarchy, or a liberatory system, flattens that out, right? So we aren't
mm,
ranking people. People aren't something to be
yeah.
ranked.
Hmm. I just posted something recently that said more men would flourish and thrive in a matriarchal society than they currently do in a patriarchal society. And I was shocked at the amount of vitriol I got of people disagreeing with that statement. But I think it's a misunderstanding, because I think they take a patriarchal view and just put women at the top and say it's just going to be hierarchical with women at the top, whereas that's still patriarchy.
Yes.
Matriarchy is flattening, it's collaborative, it's inclusive. It allows all people to flourish and not just placing men in a dominant position of authority. Um, why do you think that's so misunderstood? And like,
Sure.
is there a path towards matriarchy? Because I see the world and I see those who are still in power. Walk me through what the path is towards building that within our businesses as well.
Well, first, I just want to say, Shawn, kudos. And yes, you get it. And correct. It is not, I think what people get confused is they see it as, they misunderstand matriarchy just being patriarchy, but pink, right? So there, instead of a blue umbrella that's this size, we just make it a pink umbrella with this size. So it's the same number of people who get under it. It's just the people who are getting under it, instead of them being men, they're women. That's not what it's about at all. Matriarchy says, how do we make a bigger umbrella so everyone can get under the umbrella, right? That is very different than saying, how do we just make sure that the people who are getting safety are the right people, the people who look like me instead? It's everywhere that people who haven't unlearned these things will repeat them. And why? Because it's the only thing we know. We are so deeply conditioned into it and those with the most privileged identities are the least encouraged to imagine, right? We don't have imaginations. White people don't imagine well. If you read speculative fiction, which is something I've been getting more into with Octavia Butler and others, folks with marginalized identities have always, especially the most marginalized identities, the farther you get down from the top of that hierarchy, the more you have to begin to imagine what's possible, because you're not even close enough to see the peak. So you're imagining what can life look like, right? Because it's really hard when your life is full of oppression all the time. You have to imagine just to be able to sense what freedom could be, to think about what's possible, to feel some sense of like hope and possibility. The closer you are to the top of that, the less you're imagining, because you're just looking, thinking, well, if I could just try a little harder, I'll just get up there, right? You're not even trying to picture a different world. And so I think for so many of us, we've just never learned to imagine something different. So we just don't even know there is something different, that it doesn't have to look like it always has. And in fact, when I say always has, it hasn't always, right? This is actually more of a
I was going to
modern
ask.
invention.
Yeah, there's been matriarchal societies that have shown uh, it works, it can work, and like it benefits all people. I think about there's an Indonesian community that's matriarchal, that women are the lineage by which property passes. Men are in positions of power as well within politics and religion, and it's a much more collaborative kind of environment for folks. Um, break that idea down though. Is the idea that it's not a new concept.
Right. I mean, we can learn from indigenous cultures that have long understood that we are meant to act tribally. And I don't mean that in a cultural appropriation kind of way, but in a truly, humans are by nature tribal. We are meant to operate together to keep each other alive, right? If you think far enough back, being alive required you to have other people to have your back. You couldn't sleep and survive if you didn't have somebody else making sure that you were going to be okay, right? We had to have these communities where certain people had certain jobs, but they understood all the jobs were important. Sometimes sexist men will get into this whole hunter-gatherer thing, and they think that somehow because men are hunters and women are gatherers, that makes men more important. And anyone who actually understands human history and how humans operate knows both roles are important. No indigenous culture would have ever said, oh, I'm more important in this community of ours because I went out and caught the meat, but you cooked the meat. That was always seen as equal and collaborative and both important. And it is. You go hunt the meat all you want, but if there's nobody who can cook it and you don't know how, you're gonna get disease, right? Those roles are just as important. And so matriarchal systems, and you can call them something else if you want. You can call them collaborative systems, you could call them indigenous systems, you could call them whatever you want, but they are about saying we are a collective. We we all thrive when we all thrive. And when one part of our community is hurting, is suffering, is not, not having health and care and love, then the whole system is weakened, right? I love Adrienne Marie Brown. If you've ever read Emergent Strategy, or if you haven't, you should, because her work is really powerful. And also Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and more recently Serviceberry. They both are people who are, and Robin Wall Kimmerer is Indigenous. Adrienne Marie Brown pulls from Octavia Butler and other speculative fiction writers, but both of them are looking at what we can learn from nature as humans and as business owners or as business leaders, and
Sure.
understanding that idea of sort of symbiosis and the need of each part of the system and how we all care for each other. Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about how, like, the tree doesn't provide shade for itself. The river doesn't provide water for itself to drink. These parts of nature are caring for each other so that the entire system thrives. And that's something we humans could really stand to relearn. And yes, you're right. It's not learn. We just need to go back far enough to learn it before capitalism and white supremacy sort of got their claws in us, and we haven't allowed ourselves to get free from that.
Hmm. What does a business that has stepped into a more matriarchal, liberatory kind of perspective look like? Like practically speaking, because the business model is you have your owners, and then you have your executive suite, and then you have your managerial suite, and then you have your operators. You know, very hierarchical, right? I own it
Right.
all, and I'm hiring you all to make sure it runs. um, I know there are some models that are like an ESOP as an example, which is, there's profit sharing amongst the staff, or the operators. Is there a specific model of building business that you've seen work really well under this new concept of liberatory business?
I mean, cooperative models are really beautiful in that idea of whether that's through profit sharing or other models of sort of cooperative ownership, where the stakeholders are everyone involved financially and in other ways, right? So that the decision making power also gets more dispersed. First, though, I want to say there is no perfect system in an imperfect system. We exist inside capitalism, and that's the bulk of the world now that exists inside of some form of a capitalist system. That's not going away. And so for us to pretend that you're going to have a perfect business model inside of an imperfect system is just a lie. And so, we have to free ourselves from that to think, oh, I have to get this just right, or I'm also evil. We have to make flawed decisions inside of a flawed system. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, because I think too often the business spice that's out there is either like super, super colonial, like imperial building, empire building, that kind of thing. And you want to be a billionaire or you don't have any ambition. Or it can be all the way on this other extreme of like, you basically can't make money because that makes you evil. The truth exists somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, as does most things, it's in the gray area. It's about how can I start to make better decisions, healthier decisions for myself, because also capitalism, as leaders, we often treat ourselves as horribly or worse than we treat employees, right? We're burning ourselves out. We're overworking. We're taking on too many things. We're doubting ourselves constantly, all the things. So we have to treat ourselves like humans and then our team like humans. And the goal is just to start making more decisions in that direction. You're not going to be able to get it 100%. But yes, it does look like things like cooperative decision making. It looks like getting rid of terminology like from the top down and starting to think from leadership out. What does that look like if I start to think of myself maybe in the center of a circle that radiates out instead of in the top of something where I'm shouting orders down, right? Starting to think about how that looks. What would I do differently if I started to think of my team as all being in the same room? They're just all a little farther away from the decision, right? Or from the whatever it is. I mean, obviously, too, it looks like pay changes where we can affect that kind of change. There is no reason that we should have CEOs making 300, sometimes 600 times more than their employees. That is a phenomenon that is has only gotten worse and will only continue to get worse for a while. Again, going back to that Oracle story, since the 70s, it's gotten out of control. You know, where we can, let's reduce that. And that might look through profit sharing and or pay. And that's really hard when you're in a public company. It's a very different situation. But if you are not in a public company and you can affect change there, affect change there. Just because you can make more doesn't mean you should or need to, right? We need to remember that workers are making the work happen and they should actually be rewarded for that rather than just thinking, how much more can I extract? Can I take out of? How much more blood can I get from this turnip or whatever it is they say, right? So I think it looks like first, reimagining org structure. Get
Mm,
rid of those hierarchical maps to begin with, right? The org
mm,
charts that are top down, because language matters, visuals like that matter. It is setting the tone that says, this is how we view leadership. We view it as top down, and sometimes people say it starts from the top down as a good thing. Like, because I'm showing up different. But if you're using that sort of language, if you're still presenting that sort of things in that light, it's still in there. It's still really in there. I really want to challenge people to think about, what does it look like if I think of this differently? What if our org chart is a circle? What if it looks like leadership out? And how does that affect how I think about my employees, about how I think about them being part of decisions? I think about their stake in things, both, again, the decision stake, but also the pay stake, the reward stake. I think it really is a reimagining of everything, but also knowing there's going to be constraints. I mean, it's just, that's the
mm.
reality of living inside capitalism. There will be constraints on what you can do. But can you start to make one change that just starts to point the ship in the right direction, right? That starts to say, we're going to reject at least some of this conditioning.
I think I saw a statistic recently that said women and marginalized individuals and LGBT, specifically LGBTQ plus people, were more likely to build a business off of these different models rather than a hierarchical,
Yeah.
I own everything model. Why do you think? Why do you think that's the case? Do you think it's a societal, expectation for men to go dominate? Is it a, just it's the system that we're built to build under, and so we just kind of follow suit? Why do you think marginalized people tend to have a more collaborative perspective?
They've had to. They've had to survive, right? I think that almost anyone in any marginalized community knows that. Like, the only way that we have survived is because we care for each other. We help each other. I mean, from the time of underground railroad systems, right, to, mutual aid organizations. It is, to survive as someone with a marginalized identity, you have to have community, right? We see time and again the people who don't, and the very tragic consequences that can come from that feeling of, I am alone. No one understands, no one cares, no one's going to help me. And that does not usually go well. The thing that allows people to survive and hopefully thrive is when they have other people there helping them. I mean, I think of those like graphics of that we see in this case, it's usually women, but it could be any marginalized community where it's, a woman pulling up another woman and she's pulling up the woman below her, right up on the ladder. And that still is sort of like, hey, we're all going up the hierarchy. So I don't love that. But it is that idea of that, like, reach back and help the person behind you. And that is what marginalized communities have had to do. It's the only way to survive. Also, going back to the creativity, they've had to understand, we got to think outside the box, because the system is saying, you're not welcome here. You're not allowed.
Mm,
So if we want access to whatever the thing is, we're going to have to design it ourselves. We got to figure out how to create something that we can have. And so we've had to be creative, right? We got to get creative to figure out how to have access. And so, of course, folks who've been conditioned, not because, I don't think because capitalism wants them to be conditioned this way, but one of the consequences of capitalism is that those who have been shut out have to get creative, and those who face the most harm have to care for each other. And those things, ironically, then, are the things that create what we want. They're actually helping to condition us to create the future we want, which is, I don't want to say it's a gift of capitalism, because I don't think capitalism has a lot of gifts, but it is the most positive outcome of that is those communities end up developing these very skills that can help them build this new world.
Hmm. You mentioned being in rooms that were inclusive of queer people on paper, but still ran on that extraction and hierarchical kind of perspective. Um, and thinking in terms of like what the real question not being, am I in the room? Because I think there's a lot of like, there's been a attempt, I'd say maybe not over the last year or two since Trump 2.0, but prior to that, a big attempt to diversify what the executive level looks like or what, upper sorry, did you hear that?
I did.
Yeah,
Are you
okay.
under attack? Are you okay?
No. Okay. My
Okay.
wife works upstairs, so,
Oh, okay.
um, I'm like, "What happened?" What was I saying? Oh, so,
Diversify.
maybe not, over the last year with Trump 2.0, but before that, there's been an attempt to diversify what a workforce looks like, and creating more visibility towards LGBTQ plus people, Black and Brown people, BIPOC people. Um, but you mentioned it's not just about being in the room; it's about asking yourself, does this room require me to abandon myself in order to stay in it? What do you mean by that?
I mean, I feel like most of us can feel this in our bones, but there is a difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity looks like this room has a bunch of different people in it. Inclusion is there's a bunch of different people in the room and they all feel safe to be here. And that is a very different experience. And I think most of us have had both experiences where I mean, the worst experience is being the only of whatever in the room, right? That's not a place where most of us feel safe. We don't even feel wanted often. It's not a good experience. Being in a room where you're like, well, there's other people like me in the room, but I can tell that none of us really feel like we're safe to show up as our full selves here. Like, it's
Yeah.
more like they just wanted us in the room because they needed to say they had us in the room. Inclusion is when you're in that room and you feel like I can show up as my full self and I don't have to worry about consequences for that. Right. And I think most of us have that experience of feeling that I got to wear that mask. I got to mask up because I'm not safe to be in this room. And that can happen even inside of rooms where you would expect it wouldn't. Again, a woman led room, a queer led room, even a Black or brown led room. If it is people who are still really invested in white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal conditioning, they are going to repeat that regardless of their identity, right? I think it's really important for us to be thinking beyond diversity. And I think that's why so much of that has failed. I think so much of that efforting to say, let's make sure our spaces are more diverse. Let's get our DEI person on board. But if the DEI person is also not feeling like there's a willingness to create inclusion, there's usually only so much they could do because, again, going back to the hierarchy, they don't have power. They don't have power to actually affect meaningful change. And we noticed they're the first ones who were let go, right? They're like, well, we tried that, didn't work, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And now we got to cut back. So you're the first to go. And that sends a pretty clear message too about who's actually included.
I think that's a really interesting breakdown between diversity and inclusion of, okay, are you just putting our faces up? Because I've been, as a business owner, as a influencer, public speaker, I've been in rooms where I'm speaking and I realize, oh, I'm the only brown person. And I'm the only queer person. And now I'm a lot more intentional of kind of saying, hey, can I see your speaker lineup? Because I want to make sure that it is diverse. Um, not but now hearing a little bit more about like not just diversity so that they can say I checked a mark, but the inclusion of being able to have safety and a voice and feel heard and seen and feel like I have autonomy and authority to fully be myself in the room, I think is super interesting. What are some practical ways that, let's say there's a business owner who's listening and it's like, oh, I've done the diversity thing, but I don't know if I've fully gone through to the inclusion thing. What are some practices they can do to make that to bridge that gap?
Yeah. Well, here's a really good red flag because I know exactly what you're talking about, Sean. And I love that you do that. I do the same thing. I'm always like, okay, let me see. Because if you're inviting me on your podcast and I'm just seeing a stream of white faces, this is clear. It's not a problem. But I can also see a stream of faces that aren't just white, but the messaging is all very much the same. How to make your eight figures or whatever. That's not a space that's really inclusive, right? Because you're just repeating the same conditioning. Or and this is the red flag, places where they say things like, we don't talk about politics. right? Well, we have a real policy here. We don't want to talk about those kinds of things in the workplace. That's a real red flag because that means you are not yet comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And
Yeah.
as you know, your existence and my existence are political. Period. Just by existing, it is political. And so any space that's saying we don't talk about politics, that means I can't show up in my full identity because I can't talk about my queer identity in a space that's going to say, we don't want to talk about politics. So how can I possibly feel safe and included in a space like that? I can't. Right. So that's a really good sign is that idea of we don't talk about politics. Now, why do companies not want to talk about politics? Because they haven't learned how to deal with conflict. They haven't learned how to do harm repair. They haven't learned about accountability. They don't understand consent. Those are all things that are really important concepts for spaces that are trying to be inclusive. Too often, because they aren't doing any of that training, they're really only being diverse by bringing people into a room where they can't keep them safe because they don't understand the concepts of creating safety. Safety involves consent, right? Safety involves accountability and harm repair. Safety involves conflict, being able to have conflict, be in conflict, have discomfort. And because they don't understand that, they can't create an inclusive space. So one way to know that is if they say, we just don't talk about certain things, the only reason they're doing that is because they don't have the skill set to be able to have those kinds of conversations. And that's a real good sign that it is not an inclusive space. Because again, if you can't talk about George Floyd's murder at work, how does every Black person in the room, what does that tell them? Right? We know what it
Mm.
tells them. And so that is not a safe space for that Black person to be in.
Yeah, and I think about the most recent Supreme Court ruling on conversion therapy. If you can't have a conversation around that, then what does that tell to your LGBTQ plus work,
Exactly.
staff? You, you're obviously um, now, Becky, you're openly bisexual, but you describe yourself as a white, cishet, and straight presenting individual, where your queerness can largely be invisible unless you make an active choice to be visible. As a bisexual man, there are tells, right? I have people who come up to me and ask me if I'm gay because of my voice or because of the way I walk or talk. But I'm in a straight, quote unquote, straight presenting
Right.
relationship. Um, so, one of the challenges I've found in being a bisexual man is either having to come out as not gay and like, hey, I'm actually bisexual, and that creating a lot of confusion, or choosing the spaces where I do say, hey, I'm bisexual, um, despite the images you see of me and my wife. So how are you navigating your bisexuality and your queerness in spaces where that's not necessary? There's no tell unless you actively choose that.
I have been more and more trying to actively do that. I have a pride flag behind me. I always wear my pride necklace. I try to do some things that will hopefully make that signal. Wearing this necklace, which I love that my son always makes sure it's out. He wants me to feel proud, and I love that. He's
Mhm.
young. But that I have already noticed that some of these subtle things make a big difference when I'm in spaces for other people to feel some of that safety, some of that inclusion. But I get it. And actually, I think, Shawn, you have it harder because we live in a misogynist society as well. And misogyny makes it so that for bisexual men, it's more challenging. That is actually a more difficult thing because it is something that is seen as like a weaker man or whatever, right? You're closer to a woman in patriarchy's mind. And so for you, I think it's actually more challenging than for me. I mean, there's similar thing for bisexual women where it becomes this like erotic thing, and that is also not acceptable. But I've been trying to make it more public where I can because I also understand the privilege that comes from having that ability to not be perceived as my full self and the safety that that provides me. And I don't want to have that safety. I don't want to use that as a crutch. I don't love
Mm.
relying on that safety. I know it's there. I know it's there. I know that I can just as easily take off the necklace, take off the flags, never tell anyone, go out with my husband and be perceived in a way that my safety is not ever really at risk. Um, And I did that for a long time, and I don't wanna do that anymore, because that harms everyone. The more that I, as somebody who does have a lot of privilege, can show up and say, "I wanna reject some of that privilege because that privilege isn't okay," I think it helps everybody. So I try to talk about it more, I put it in my bios, I try as much as I can to put it out there. I certainly don't hide it, but I did for a long time. I did, because
Mm,
I also knew that, like, well, I mean, for all of my own reasons of, like, coming out in a more quote unquote professional space, while I was still really bought into the ideas of, what that meant. I've rejected so much of that now, and I really do try to just be far more public about it, because I think it's part with privilege comes responsibility, right? And that's why I think it's important when I have this privilege that is unearned. It's an unearned privilege to have others perceive me as being straight. I think it's important to use that privilege to try and help protect people who for whom they can't be perceived in that way, or it's much more
mm,
difficult to be perceived in that way. As you're sort of saying, you often don't have that privilege. I do have that privilege, and I need to use that in a way that helps people to see, like, oh, you thought I was okay when you thought I was this, but guess what? I'm not that. So now you have to sort of sit with that cognitive dissonance of, well, why is she suddenly not okay? you know?
yeah. There's a video that I saw a little while ago of this compilation of people who were in what could be like shady situations. So think, they're on a train and somebody sits right next to them and it's like, okay, is this person safe? And then like their keychain shows a rainbow and it's like, oh, a breath of like you kind of a breath of relief of, okay, they're a safe person. Or like you go into a new class and you're being introduced as this new student and a couple of the students that are also in that class have like a rainbow pin or a rainbow flag. And I think about a lot of arguments I hear is like, well, why do you need to have that? Why do you need that level of visibility? Why do you need to have Pride Month? Why do you need to be seen in that way? And I think about how much relief and freedom and safety that gets created with that visibility.
You could
Um,
feel it in
are
your
you
body, right? You
you
feel
can
it
just feel
immediately in your
that,
body.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel it too. I feel the tension go where I'm immediately like, okay, I can take a breath here. And going back to what we said about community, we know the cost to LGBTQ youth who don't feel that safety, who don't have that safety, and the difference that it can make for them to have one place, one person that is safe. It is huge, right? And that is that responsibility that if I can show up and, like, I think about my son and his friends and them and the way he has pride in my pride and shares that and what that does for how he's going to show up in the world as a white cis het, I think, man. And then, for his friends to be in this environment and to know me and all of that. And if any of them were ever to come out and they didn't feel safe in their homes, I would hope that maybe they would be able to say, I have a safe person. It has ripple effects that we don't even know, right? And that's why it's just so important to embrace that privilege, to use it as as good, as a way,
Yeah.
try to pay that privilege forward.
Yeah. Um, you ha this wasn't always your perspective. You mentioned, like, you had certain perspectives about, like, what professionalism and coming out looks like. When did things change for you?
It's been an evolution. I have always identified as a feminist. I've always thought of myself as sort of a good liberal, good white liberal, right? I've always been one of the good ones in my mind. And I mean, I've never voted for a Republican in anything. Like, I am what I think a lot of, particularly white women, who are progressive or who are liberal think of themselves, but have maybe not actually done any meaningful work around understanding white supremacy, understanding misogyny, understanding capitalism and the ways that that conditioning shows up and gets internalized and then shows up in how we act. And I certainly was that person. I mean, I thought I was one of the good ones, but would I cross the street if I saw a black man coming at me? Probably, right? And I would blame it on misogyny. I'd say, oh, it's because men aren't safe. But if it wasn't until I could get really honest with myself that that wasn't the whole story, right? I live in a world that has taught me to fear black men. And that is not my fault that I was conditioned that way. but it is my work to unlearn that, right? And for me, the real work started in 2014 when Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. I lived half a mile from where he was killed by that police officer. I saw the fires outside of my door, and it really hit home for me that I wanted to understand more. I wanted to understand it. Like, I knew I would vote the right way. And I was sort of like, yeah, I get that's wrong and bad. But I wanted to understand the anger that I saw that I didn't quite share. I thought it was bad. I didn't like it, thought it was wrong, but not enough that I was going to go out and protest. Not enough that I was that angry. And I wanted to understand why it was that I was feeling this disconnect. And I started doing research. I'm a journalist by training and trade, and I just started researching. And the numbers don't lie. The numbers were very clear in my community in St. Louis how racist policing is. And because it didn't affect me personally, because I have so much privilege, I was able to sort of ignore it or put it at arm's length for a really long time. And that kind of coming to my back door sort of pushed me ahead to say, I need to understand this more. And that was the thing that sort of just began the unraveling and all of the learning, lots of reading, lots of reading, and reflecting. And through that process, then, because, again, I'm an intersectional feminist, I think all of these overlapping identities matter. The intersections of those are important, not something that's just happenstance, but actually compounds the effects of all of these marginalizations. Through all of that, began to unpack some of my own issues around my queer identity and having to confront my own internalized homophobia that I didn't think was there. But it was, right? The same process of having to understand all of the racism that is in my blood that has always been there through lineage and also conditioning. That same stuff was there for homophobia. And that was really hard to sit with. It was easier to sit
Mhm.
with my internalized racism than it was the homophobia because it meant I had to confront the parts of me that hated myself. And that was,
Mm.
was so tough. But all of that process, it all played on itself, and it's kinda like once you start peeling the layers of the onion, you can't stop. Like, you're gonna cry, it's gonna be messy, it's not gonna be fun, but you gotta just keep going until you're done with it, and I'll probably be doing it forever to some degree, but the really hard work was 5, 6 years, right? Like, from 2014 to ironically, till about 2020, honestly, and then when George Floyd was murdered, it felt like everyone else was sort of awakening to these things that I was like, oh, now I can talk to, there's other white people I can finally talk to about some of these issues, which was nice finding more community of people who were also finally invested in doing some of that work.
You mentioned the internal homophobia being really difficult.
Mhm.
What was that like? What was the internal homophobia for you?
I mean, because I had gay friends, lots of them, right? I've been to gay bars and I, had my pride flags and I support the LGBT community. It was realizing I am part of the I knew
Mm.
I knew I was, but I always kind of kept myself at arm like I was outside of the circle. I in my mind, I couldn't call myself LGBTQ because I was married to a man. I'm not allowed. They're not gonna want me. They're gonna reject me. They're gonna say I'm not part of this community because I'm not currently presenting that way. I felt like a fraud. And it was also just having to realize that all of that stuff was about my own beliefs as a bisexual person about whether that actually, like, did the B actually matter? Is the B real?
Mm.
You know what I mean? I guess because
Yeah.
it was it's hard to explain that. I'm sure you understand it too, Shawn, but it's a really weird feeling to be like, it's easier for me to say for other people, like it quote unquote counts. For me, it was like, but does it really? And then I had to sit with all of that because it was like, oh, if I can't believe that about myself, then I can't actually believe it about other people. And what does that say? Because that goes against everything I think I believe. Yet here I am grappling with this. It was really challenging. It was so confronting because I realized the whole reason I was having such a challenge was because I think there was some part of me that wanted it to not be true for me. Right. Because
Mm.
it's hard. It's painful. Like there's challenges with that. I have to like admit something, you know what I mean? Like, it just represented a change in identity that I wasn't yet ready to really embrace, and it just took a while. It was really, really hard because I
Yeah.
think I didn't want it to be true that there was some part of me that actually rejected that part of me. But there
What
was,
was
there
the
was.
tipping Yeah, what was the tipping point for you where you started to say, "I am bisexual and this is a good thing and I am this."
I don't know, Sean. I guess it was a process. I don't know if it's not like I can point to a day, although I will say there was one of the national coming out days. What year would that have been? I don't remember. I think it was after 2020. So 2021, 2022, probably. So it's only been since then that I came out like in the business sense, right? Before that, I mean, my husband knew, my friends knew. But I think it felt more like I just kind of hint at it or sort of say it to a person here or there, but it wasn't my identity. I was like, this isn't really who I am. It's just like a part of me, but it's not like central to my identity. But so many other things are. Being a woman is central to my identity. Being a feminist is central to my identity. Why was I keeping this from being central to my identity? It is a core part of my identity. So I was keeping it like this arm's length. So it took until after 2020, and I had been doing so much of this work around unpacking around racism. And it was sort of like, I think I just reached that point of, I have to unpack this part too. And
Hmm.
so slowly but surely I was doing that work. And then in that, it was either 2021 or 2022 on that coming out day, I was like, you know what? I'm going to send an email to my community, to my email list of like 4,000 people and just say, hey, here I am. This is me. And like, in some ways it felt weird because I was like, I've known that. It's not like it's news, but it did feel like this is me announcing not that this is true, but that I am ready to sort of embrace this, that I am ready to
Mhm.
stop making, I'm not going to hold it at arm's length anymore, which was,
Hmm.
it was like, I cried and
Mhm.
I haven't cried for other things around some of this unpacking of stuff. And I was like, I was so scared. I don't, it, I, and it's so strange to say that because I haven't been scared. I share, as you know, on social media, I say all kinds of things. That was the hardest thing I think I've ever had to hit send on. And I did, though, after
Mm.
I hit send, I immediately felt like, which is always a good sign when you feel that same of like, I see the rainbow, I feel that calm in my body. I immediately felt like this release in my body that was like, okay, that's what I needed. I didn't know I needed it, but I needed it.
Yeah, I think that's such a universal experience in the queer community is coming out, feeling really scared. I remember my own coming out. I'm in a quote unquote straight passing relationship, which I actually don't like that terminology anymore. I don't call our relationship straight passing. It is a queer relationship because I am queer,
Yeah,
and even though my wife is a heterosexual Black woman, I'm queer and I bring that to the relationship. So we are in a queer relationship. Um, I think the idea or the concept of like being in a straight passing relationship dismisses so many bisexual people who are in those relationships and bring their queerness to that relationship,
yeah,
almost as if straight passing is some type of ideal or like some type of
exactly.
category. Um, but I
I had those
remember
same
coming out and
feelings. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I just remember coming out and feeling like literally like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm kind of shaky, but it just has to happen. And then that immediate sense of like euphoria or like, oh, okay, it's done. And I can finally show up as me 100%.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you're right about that passing thing. I really try to reject participating in this idea around passing for trans folks because I think all of our trans siblings are beautiful and amazing and whatever identities, like whatever gender they say they are, and they don't have to look away. They don't have to pass as anything to be valid, to be count, to be worthy, whatever. And yet there is that terminology. And I guess what I'm saying, what I really mean is how I am perceived. So maybe it's a straight perceived relationship. Because yeah, I don't, for a long time though, maybe I was trying to pass as a straight relationship. Right.
Mm.
And I do love that reframing of, yeah, it is a queer relationship, even if my partner isn't. Um, and after coming out, after sending that email, the support I received, because I also posted on social media at that time, and the support from the queer community was amazing. I think I had it in my
Mm.
head that they were gonna be like, "Yeah, but that doesn't count. Like, you're in a straight relationship, who are you I don't know what I thought would happen, right? But it didn't. Instead, I heard from, especially the thing that was most amazing to me was the amount of bisexual women on my email list who were also married to straight men who messaged me to say, I needed, because that email that I sent talked about all of that, about my own weird thoughts about it not counting, about me not wanting to claim the LGBTQ mantle for myself, and like I didn't being an imposter or whatever it was that I was holding on to, and having so many other queer women, bisexual women specifically saying, I know exactly what you're saying, and I have felt the exact same thing, and many of them who hadn't come out yet because of that. That felt really good of like, okay, that's this piece of here's this privilege I'm holding on to. How do I use that to try and help support, empower, have others feel like they're seen? That meant so much to me because
Mhm.
every time I've thought I'm the only one who thinks something, and I've been willing to share that thing, I've always found, "Oh, it turns out I'm not the only one who thinks this thing." So I was surprised at how many other women were saying, "I feel the same way." Like I whisper it because I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to like steal someone's thunder or something. But no, I am a valid part of this community too.
Yeah, I am reminded of all of the support I received that I
Yeah.
was surprised by, and also not just the support, but the Me Too experience.
Yeah.
I personally think those 2 words are some of the most powerful words you can say to another human because it's so validating and it's so powerful. And, just to say, I have so many people in my family, in my friend group, in my clientele, in my staff that came to me and said, "Oh, me too. I'm part of the queer community, but I'm not ready to share." And it was so beautiful to be able to be so visible that those still in the shadows were able to say, "Hey, I have someone that I can talk to now, and I didn't before." And knowing that I'm a safe person with this part of you and you can fully be yourself around me, it was surprising how much of that I got, and to realize how many people are queer. Like there are so many more people who are queer that we don't see or hear from because of the pressure to not be visible. So I am so interested in hearing how can we create more collaborative spaces in business and life, etc., that allows for that visibility of, you can be fully 100% you here.
Yeah, and I mean, I speak from such a place of privilege that I generally, when answering questions like this, try to speak to people who also hold privilege. And by the way, you can hold marginalized identities and still have privilege, right? So yes, I have marginalized identities. I'm a woman, I'm queer and neurodivergent, but I'm white, and that in our society, that holds the greatest privilege, and I recognize that. And so I think when you have privilege, it looks like passing on visibility, passing on leadership, passing on all sort money. So what are the ways that I can do that? I can look in the room and say, who's not here? We're not conditioned to do that. We are conditioned to think, how do I get in the room? Right? How do I take up more space
Mm,
in this room? How do I make people in this room notice me? We're not conditioned to look around the room and say, whose voice isn't here? Or who's here but isn't being heard? Right. And so it's important for us to look at that and say, how can I be a piece? How do I use my privilege in this space to affect real change here? So instead of answering the question myself, maybe I say, do you have a thought on that, Shawn? Right. Maybe it looks like this one's really hard for people with privilege, but maybe it looks like you don't take the promotion because you know the other person's actually more qualified than you. And you say that. Right? Sometimes it's hard. It's not always easy. Sometimes we have to make really hard decisions too. And it may look like I can't affect whether or not people in my company make more money, but I know I have more than I actually need. So maybe I fund mutual aid requests from Black and brown folks or from people in the queer community, thinking outside of even charity organizations, right?
mhm.
Because many of those are also recreating capitalist harms. So what can I do? Maybe I take direct action. And that looks like actually just funding one person's mutual aid to help them get a new car, right? So I think some of it just looks like, how do I use my privilege in a way that helps others gain access to things that for me, the access was easier? Right? Whatever
Mm,
that access is, whether that's access to money, whether that's access to advancement, whether that's access to visibility, how do I help those folks, right? That's that picture of the woman helping the woman up, right? It's like, how do I hold the door open for the people that are still coming in behind me? And I think that's the
yeah,
most important thing any of us can do.
Yeah, I think about some of the practices that I've started to incorporate, as a business owner, as a leader in a variety of places. I think, okay, is this a meeting that I'm exclusively invited to? Let me purposefully bring somebody else, like an intern or somebody who has a quote unquote lower position so that they can be present and learn. Here's how leadership is discussing this topic. Here's how I can mentor you into this room, even if it's kind of like taboo, like, hey, this is an executive meeting, quote unquote, of okay, great, and I'm choosing to bring this person who would no other, not otherwise have an opportunity to be in this room to learn and to grow. I encourage you to bring somebody at our next meeting so that they can learn and hear and grow. I think mentorship is such a huge opportunity that marginalized people who do get access to these rooms can kind of bring to the table. And it's something that I try to be as intentional about of, okay, who am I mentoring? Who am I bringing into the rooms I'm allowed in and have pushed myself in? And, am I creating visibility opportunity for others? I think that's really beautiful.
I love that, and then I would even say too, just to add on to that, because if somebody pushes back or we don't have the power to maybe make the change by having the person come in, we can also always speak truth to power, and that is something when we have privilege to remember. So even if you're not able to bring someone else into the room, asking, "Why aren't these people in the room? Why does everyone in the room look alike?" Right? Like, asking that question so that sometimes we have to create the discomfort. Change doesn't come from comfort, right? We know that. It comes when we are pushed into some discomfort, and privilege doesn't like discomfort. It's not comfortable with discomfort because it does everything it can avoid it. It's coddled to it. Doesn't usually have to be uncomfortable. And so sometimes that can be really hard for people, especially when you have privilege. You may not like discomfort. You're going to have to challenge yourself to be uncomfortable and have some uncomfortable conversations and say, why isn't this person in the room? Why are we not inviting these people? Why does our hiring continue to and bring in people who look the same? What are we doing wrong here? What changes can we make? And you may get pushback, and you have to be willing to sort of stand on both feet and say, "Yep, I know we're uncomfortable here, but we got to have these conversations."
And I think that's so pivotal to that community as infrastructure perspective, as opposed to patriarchal, hierarchical kind of idea of I'm in the room and only I can be, you have to be down there. Of wait, no, 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 we're all welcome. Which brings me a little bit to your book, Liberate Your Business.
Thank you.
I know you have a copy. If you could show the
Oh,
audience, so Liberate Your Business is being described as a practical, no bullshit guide for entrepreneurs who care about justice, community, and building businesses that do not run on burnout or extraction. Tell me more about this book.
yeah, it's sort of the distillation of the years now, decade or something of this work that I've been doing and the evolution that I've been experiencing and working with business owners who do want to challenge these systems, but also who understand there are real limits inside of a broken system. So, how do we start to affect change in the smaller steps, the practical ways, day to day? Like you were asking, like, how do I start to just make some difference? And there's chapters for all sorts of it. And it starts internally because I think that gets overlooked. But as I've mentioned, how we treat ourselves as our first employee or as a leader, as the first person we're managing ourselves, we have to examine that relationship first. Because if we're still, again, if I have all this internalized homophobia, I can say I'm the best ally or the best part of I can say I'm part of this community or I really support all of my LGBTQ friends. But if I don't even really support myself, that's just not really true yet, right? I got to do this excavation work to understand that. And so it begins with understanding our internal stuff and understanding the system that we operate in. Because also, as I say, we have to work on ourselves. Too much of what's out there is very focused on the individual. And again, we live inside of a system. So much of what we take on as our own stuff isn't our stuff at all. It's the system. Imposter syndrome, as an example, right? That is a term that was coined to describe women who were not standing up in the workplace and like asserting themselves, going after things, not feeling confident in their abilities. It was coined in the 70s. The workspace for women in the 70s doesn't look like it does today. And even today, it isn't great, right? It was putting on to women as if they were not asserting themselves enough, not believing in themselves enough, versus a system that would, of course, make them feel like not only make them, but wasn't safe for them to show up in that way. So it talks both about the systems and internal, and then it starts to move outward into things like hiring, activism. How do we show up as activists, as entrepreneurs? Again, that idea that we don't talk politics, that's just privilege speaking. So we have to challenge some of that. So it sort of examines all the parts of business, and it does it in really, like, I'm not a big fan of long form narrative for nonfiction, like business books. Just kind of give me the stuff. I want to take action. And so every chapter, there's 25 of them that explore all these different elements, and each one has a very short piece of my own story that kind of relates to it. But mostly it's, here's what we've been made to believe by the system. This is what it looks like if we start to radically reimagine it. And then here are some practical things you can start to do to change this part of your business and or your belief system.
Yeah, I think the framing of challenging capitalism within capitalism, while existing in this capitalist system is a really interesting kind of perspective, because I've always have this kind of utopian perspective of
Yeah.
we just need to crash capitalism completely today and then rebuild this utopian kind of communal experience, which is unrealistic. It's not going to happen. Um, but there are changes we can begin to deploy within the spaces of influence we have to make it look more like a communal collaborative space. Is there tell me a little bit more about that pragmatic approach and why you took that approach with this versus a tear it all down and build
Yeah.
from scratch?
I would love to tear it all down too, Sean. Like, if I'll get the match, you get the lighter, let's start burning, right? Like, I'm all about that. And I also know that's just not going to happen. It is so deeply ingrained, and it's been going on for hundreds of years now that we have gotten into, and thousands of white supremacy, capitalism itself, hundreds of years. It's pretty well taken hold, right? And I do think we are, or maybe I'm hopefully thinking that we are starting to see some of the last gasps of late stage capitalism. I do think people are, on the whole, getting really tired of it. So I do think bigger revolution is maybe coming. But in the meantime, I do think it's really important for us to just think, like, if this book only makes you challenge even just one thing that you do, if it just makes you challenge the idea that you have to work until you're exhausted and you start to give yourself a little more rest, I will feel good, because if enough people just did that, that would start to change the system, right? If it just
Mm,
makes you examine your hiring practices so that you think, what am I doing here that might be leading to a series of people who all seem fairly similar to me? And you start to make small changes that changes that, that will make it's the ripple effects of all that is huge. Like, I really do believe in those butterfly wings, that theory of one small change starts to change everything. I think all of these little change do start to fracture the system, and with enough little cracks, Kelly Deals, who I interviewed in the book, who's a feminist marketing expert, once told me, like, yeah, I can't knock that wall down, right? I'm not knocking down the wall of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Is not happening. I don't have that strength in myself. But if enough of us focus on our little 1 foot by 1 foot square and we chip away, eventually all of that will weaken the wall enough that it does eventually crumble. And so that's my why. I just think
mm.
each of us needs to examine, are we looking at our little, instead of trying to think so huge that nothing happens, because that's what the system wants. It wants us to, like, be so focused in either so many places that we can't address at all, which is kind of that, like, or like not looking at all, that nothing ever changes. But if we actually each get really focused in our little part of the the world where we actually can affect change, that will do it. It will do it over time if enough of us do it.
I hear that as a very hopeful and optimistic perspective that it's possible. And I think what goes through my mind is I look at Trump 2.0, I look at Peter Thiel, I look at Elon Musk, I look at Project 2025, and what I see is a lot of cementing power of even past, post Trump's administration, the power that has been cemented in and the systems that have been cemented in over the last, Trump 1 and now Trump 2 will continue to last a really long time. And it can feel very hopeless, and maybe this is just kind of a pessimistic perspective. um what would you say to someone who is looking at these systems and seeing all of this legislative policy, administrative political force to cement capitalism as it stands today, and says, well, I'm just little me. I just have a small business or medium sized, but like I'm not going to make the change, like you said, and maybe doesn't see it as hopeful. What would you say to that person?
Well, first of all, I'm Gen X. We're nihilists. Like, we grew up in a time of, fighting with communism and Challenger explosions, and like I've seen it, and I think most of my Gen Xers are also nihilists. So like I totally get it. I can fall into a deep pit of despair. Thanks to Lexapro, I can usually find my way out. But I do understand that feeling, and if you watch my social media enough, it does show up. Like I get pretty freaking frustrated and can easily fall into that place of what's the point, right? Because we can't change anything. But then I go back into my communities that I've built and the communities that I exist in. Many of, almost, I mean, all the communities I'm in have a lot of marginalized voices. Many of them are with really amazing Black and Black queer women. And those are the women, most especially, who remind me it's a real privilege to check out. Some people can't check out. They don't,
Oh,
there is no privilege to be able to say, well, I can't do anything about it. So might as well just, go on about business. Because there again, your existence is political. Your existence doesn't allow you to just check out. And I have enough privilege that I can. I could just check out and just say, screw it, I'm just gonna go get mine, right? I can't do that because it's not who I am, but also because I see other people who can't. They just don't have that privilege to be able to do that. And who keep challenging me to remember that I can get fixated on the big picture that I can't change. Because you're right, Shawn, we can't change it. I cannot on my own do anything about Trump. I cannot on my own do anything about Peter Thiel or Elon Musk or any of them. I can't change all of those systems. I can't stop them from doing what they're doing. I wish we had a more meaningful other party. We don't. I can't. All I can do is vote on that issue. But what I can do is make a difference in my local community. I can keep fighting to make sure my school board doesn't get taken over by these people. And we're fighting that fight here and we're winning. I can make sure that the people inside of the communities I am still have places that feel that they can be safe, that they can finally drop their mask, even if it's only for 30 minutes or an hour. So they get that release in their body and have a moment with some of that tension released. I can give to mutual aid funds in our lifetimes. And this is depressing. We're not going to change it. It's not going away. Capitalism will not,
really?
I don't think, end in my lifetime. That's a bummer, but it's also reality. So I can either let that excuse me from doing anything, or I can say, okay, that isn't going to change, but what can? What can I do? And I try. Not every day I don't succeed, but I try to look for those opportunities, look for those places where I can make a difference because that stuff feels really good in a world that feels really heavy.
I think about that line in Hamilton at the very end, which is legacy is planting seeds for a tree that you'll never be able to sit
Mm.
under and never be able to see. And, whether it happens in our lifetime or not, we are still capable of making progress and handing the baton to the next generation who will hand it to the next, who will hand it to the next. I'm curious, what would you say if you were in a room with Elon Musk, with Jeff Bezos, with Trump, with the people who have benefited the most from capitalism in this model? What would you say to them to move the needle or to convince them what you've benefited from the most is actually not the best model to build society with?
Shawn, I wish that I could give you an answer to that. I don't think they can be moved. I would love to be proven wrong, but I think they had to have sold their souls a long time ago to buy in as deeply as they have. If you are willing to be Elon Musk, almost a trillionaire, he is on target to be the first trillionaire ever, probably only in a few years, although he keeps doing such dumb things that hurt his stock prices. Who knows? But I mean, he is on track to be a trillionaire. And I don't think people understand how much wealth a billion is, let alone a trillion. If you are willing to do that, knowing the cost that have to come from that, starting with emerald mining all the way to, fuel cells for your cars that you put out there. If you're willing to do that, I don't think anything will move you. You've lost your humanity. It's why I think it's evil. I think capitalism can corrupt people. I think they are too far gone. I think they've lost their souls. And I hate saying that, but I mean, I really believe they are at the point of just being evil, and you can't reason with somebody who is evil. Like that's sociopathic behavior. And those aren't people where you can reach them with empathy and compassion and appeal to their good side. I would say the people that I would want to appeal to are the people who are aspiring to be billionaires, but are actually people who are like you and me and most people. There are 1,100 billionaires in the US. 1,100. There are 330 million Americans. Okay. We outnumber them by a lot. We could stop all of this today, right now. If 329 million of us and more united against 1,100 people, we could end billionaires. That could be over. We don't. And why? Because so many of those 330 million still are believing the lie that they might be able to eventually be that billionaire. So they don't want to stop it because they want that. Those are the people I would rather appeal to ask them, at what cost? At what cost are you willing to do that? Yes, having your needs met is important. But that's why aspiring to being a billionaire is the problem, because you being a billionaire means other people can't have their needs met, right? So the suffering that you think that billions is going to take you out of will actually only cause it for other people. The thing that would actually make us happy is to have our needs met and then to have spaciousness in our lives for things like joy, fun, play, rest, right? And that's what liberation looks like, is how do we make sure that everyone has their needs met so that all of us can have more of the things that actually make humans happy, right? And getting your billions, sure, it'll meet your needs and it would afford you more space to have all those other things, but at what cost? At the cost of a lot of other people's, 330 million other people's ability to have happiness, real happiness. So yeah, I'm not going to appeal to Trump. He's too far gone. And also, if I were in a room with any of those men, I would probably end up in prison. So it's best that doesn't happen. But I would try to appeal to all the other people who still, for whatever reason, think that's the answer to their problems, because it's not.
Hmm. Do you have any data that shows taking a more um, taking this approach as opposed to the capitalistic patriarchal approach benefits not just the kind of moral relief of knowing, okay, I'm doing good in the world, but also, benefits the company as a whole, benefits the company as a whole. For example, does it increase revenue? Does it increase productivity? Does it increase, decrease churn with your staff? Any kind of data to support that this is not just a moral model, but a business model that you can follow and still be successful.
So great question, Sean. I don't have specific data. So everything I'm going to say is more speaking to generally the data that I've sort of seen, but I can't cite anything specific. And that is to say, one, there isn't a specific business model I'm talking about. So that would make it very difficult to study, because you can't study a system, right? Like you could EOS or something else where you just study this particular system. But what I have seen in companies that have taken more liberatory approaches is productivity won't be as high. Gonna tell you that right now, because our goal is to not make humans into machines. We want to reduce individual productivity because we are killing people by trying to make them into machines or by replacing them by machines, right? That is not the goal, is not increased productivity. Definitely engagement and churn. Engagement goes up, churn goes down. That's for sure. Income? No, it'll probably go down too. Your profits are probably going to go down by design. And that is challenging for people. Yes, productivity profits go down. That's because they're meant to. We have been
Mm.
striving in this system to have those things become growth, nonstop growth. The only way you can have nonstop growth is at a cost. It has to come at a cost, right? And the cost is on the humans always. So that's what capitalism is about. It's about, how do I extract as much as I can so that I can have growth that never ends. That is the problem with a publicly traded system. There is no end number that will make any stockholder happy. It has to grow every year for them to be happy. The only way you can grow every year is to increase productivity or lower your how much you're paying. Those are not the things that increase humanity in a business. So yeah, your productivity would have to go down, your profits would have to go down. So that's challenging for people to hear, but people will live longer, they'll be healthier, they'll be
Sure.
happier, they're not going to leave, right? And those things do matter. And so some of it is it has to be a moral decision, and that's really hard. We have to have enough people who are willing to say enough. Enough. We cannot continue for the ever and never ending search for more because that only leads to death. It will eventually kill everything. It's going to cannibalize everything until there's nothing left to cannibalize, right? And that's what we're doing with
Yeah.
the earth is a great example of that. And so is what we're doing to our humans inside of companies. So it has to be a moral decision. There are favorable outcomes. They just aren't going to necessarily be tied to those two key indicators that too many companies are using right now as indicators of success. It is challenging our visions of success. It's challenging the metrics that we're measuring, right? It's saying those aren't the only metrics and they're not the most important metrics anymore, right? And that's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard, I think, for people to hear. It's hard for people to grapple with. And I would say, keep asking yourself why. Why is that hard to hear? Why is it unsettling to think maybe your productivity rates won't continue to go down? Why or up? Why is it challenging to hear that your profit rates might actually go down a little? Why is that so hard?
Mm. I
That's
think
our conditioning.
what comes up from yeah, what comes up for me is as a business owner to be told I can change the way that I'm doing things, and guess what? You're going to lose money doing it, but
Mm,
it's the more moral maybe approach. I can get behind the moral approach, but then I think, okay, well then my business isn't going to survive. It's going to like I can't survive
yeah.
if my profits go down.
I didn't
What
say
is
you were
your
gonna lose
response to
revenue.
that?
I didn't say you were gonna lose revenue, Shawn. You might actually make more revenue because as we've seen with Target and Costco, the difference in these 2 companies, revenues can actually go up when people see that you are an ethical, moral company, right? I'm not talking about your revenue. I talked about profit. And the
Mm,
idea that we need more profits for success, ever increasing profits is a real thing that I want you to sit with and challenge because having less extra, because what is profit? Profit is extra. Profit is surplus. Profit is hoarding, right? How much profit is enough profit? And I mean, capitalism would tell you there is no enough. There is no enough profit, right? But there is enough, right? And that is the thing that we have to grapple with ourselves is when is it enough? Capitalism doesn't ask for enough. Never. It's only going to tell you more. I am challenging people to say what's enough because I'm not saying you can't, you have to make money. And that's part of this. Like we exist inside of a system that you have to make money. You got to be able to pay your employees. You got to be able to pay your vendors. You got to be able to pay, you need a salary. You have to be able to make money. But what you don't have to do is continue to hoard beyond what people need. And yes, I'm saying maybe you need to pay yourself a little less, right? So that your employees can get paid a little more. But we can move these levers inside of the revenues and not have that mean that we don't have profits, but maybe we don't have as much profit. And is that
mhm.
okay? Can you be okay with a 10 or a 15% profit margin instead of a 20, 25, 50? Right? What is the number at which you could say there's enough safety here that I can make sure that I'm also operating in a way that allows my people to not get sick and drop dead of heart attacks because I'm overworking them?
I think that's such a great distinction of revenue versus profit, and recognizing like your revenue may even go up as you begin to disperse your profits more, equitably, and create a more liberatory based business. Putting these practices into place. Who's the best reader for this book? Who do you want to get this book into the hands of?
I mean, it's written for entrepreneurs who are running smaller businesses where there is more of that freedom to make meaningful changes, where you have some power to affect change. I have clients that are solopreneurs up to clients who are making 20, 30 million in revenue in their companies. But they are the key stakeholder who has the most power to actually affect change and who wants to affect change, who cares. These are people who are those good white liberals or those good liberal, those good progressive people, whoever they are, who like, I vote all the right ways. But also probably somewhere in them know I own this business and I could probably be affecting more change here. Or I left corporate America because I hated it. And yet my company that I'm building is starting to feel kind of like corporate America, even though it's smaller, it's starting to feel like that. Those are the people I want to capture with this because they're the people who can actually start to make real change. Even again, if you're a company of one, that still matters. You still have your little space on the wall that you get to chip away at. And if that looks like you stop working yourself so hard for ever increasing growth when you start to realize, you know what, maybe I actually have enough. Maybe 100,000 or two, whatever your number is, maybe that's enough. I don't have to keep killing myself to make more for no reason, and I could actually sleep a little more, or I could like go to my kids' school play and or whatever it looks like for you, that's success. Or if you're a person who has 50 employees and can actually, like, I have a client now who's reimagining, even though she has 1099 consultants, she's trying to figure out, how do I provide them with a cheaper alternative to get healthcare? Right? I can't provide them a employee healthcare product, but I can work with somebody that allows them to get access to healthcare at a much more affordable rate. And yeah, it's going to come at some cost, but at what I have profits, right? Like, this is not a company that's not profitable. It's a profitable company, and I can make a difference here, and a meaningful difference in the lives of people for whom otherwise are having to make a decision on, do I even have healthcare? Right? These are the kinds of challenges that I want people to grapple with, anywhere from I'm the only person to I have a small company, and even a medium-sized company, but I can actually affect real change here. It's for the decision makers.
Yeah, I love it. And as I'm, just getting familiar with the ideas and concepts, I'm recognizing, oh, here are the liberatory practices that we've already implemented. For example, we give 10% of our profits, we distribute back to all of our staff. And what we've found is that it's a really attractive compensation plan because they know that there's an unlimited amount of money they could make as we grow for themselves as well. And it's not just we're working so that we can make them richer, but we're working so all of us can become wealthier. And that
That's
is the number that we came up with that works within our financial kind of projections and
Yeah.
model. It's not perfect. I wish it were more, but that's kind of where we're getting started at.
But that's it,
And
Shawn.
like
That's
these,
thinking within this system, within what's possible, and how do I begin to make change? You're not gonna be perfect. You can't be, because you exist in an imperfect system, right? In a perfect world, well, we won't go there because some people don't like the idea of everyone having the same. So we'll stop that.
yeah,
But in a perfect world, things would look very different. We don't live in that world. But
yeah.
thinking differently, challenging the norms to say, I have extra. Again, going back, it's not about revenue. Although, again, even within revenue, let's look at the levers that we can pull to make things feel more equitable. But most especially, let's look at where there's extra, where there is surplus,
Yeah.
where we are talking about where the potential for hoarding. How do we begin to think about that in a way that's more equitably distributed? Right. And
And the
that
way
is
that we were
important.
Yeah, and the way that we were able to kind of explore that was, we already give 10% commission to all of our affiliates. Why not we give 10% of commission that's available for non-affiliate revenue to go towards our employees, right? Like just build in a 10% commission, whether it's to an affiliate, whether it's to a referral partner, or to our staff. And so it's already distributed elsewhere. Why not distribute it here to the people who are making the company actually run? Becky, this has been such an incredible conversation. Where do we get the book?
BeckyMollenkamp.com. It's front and center on the website there. I mean, it's also will be available in all the traditional places you buy books, or you can ask your library to get it in, which would be amazing. Honestly, speaking of, equitable decisions, like, I made the pricing as the lowest I could so that libraries can access it for the least amount of money, because I really would love to see it in libraries. I want people who might not otherwise have access to this kind of information to be able to get it. But if you're want to buy it and say thank you for my work, BeckyMollenkamp.com.
I love it, Becky. And we'll put all of the links in the description below. Click that, and you'll be able to get access to that book. Becky, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Shawn. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
As you know, I'm on a mission to expand what it means to be LGBTQ plus in leadership positions. One way you can help is by subscribing to this channel. By subscribing, you make our content more visible and get it in front of the right people. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Proud to Lead is produced by Next Step Social and Podcasting. Thank you to everyone who made this episode possible. For more information, visit nextstepsocial.com/proudtolead.